Hi, this is Binny Freedman from Yeshivat Orayta speaking for Mizrahi. This week's Parsha is Parashat Masei, the conclusion of Sefer Bamidbar. Interesting, the Torah concludes with a delineation of all the different stops, 42 different stops on the journey that the Jewish people took over the course of 40 years from Egypt to the land of Israel. We're headed in the right direction. We know where we're going, but do we always appreciate where we are? One of the interesting stops that the Jewish people make is in a place called Refidim. They encamped in Refidim, and there wasn't enough water to drink. And then the next pasuk, Vayisum Refidim, and they left Refidim, and they encamped in the desert in Sinai. That's it. They got to Refidim, and there wasn't water to drink. Nothing more to say. We know what Refidim was. We know what happened at Refidim. They weren't just thirsty. They complained. God tells Moshe, you got to give them water. He has to take a staff. He has to hit the rock. It's a miracle, right? They don't see the hand of Hashem, right? Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu imayim. They question, where is God? And the next pasuk, Vayavo Amalek. Amalek comes. The first battle the Jewish people fight, a war. And all the pasuk mentions is they were thirsty. But Moshe Feinstein in his Darash Moshe has a fascinating insight. There's a deep message here. Why is it important that there was no water? Because the question is why there was no water. There are three basic components that the Jewish people needed in the desert. They needed food, they needed water, and they needed clothing. Can't survive without clothing. Now it's interesting, there were miracles that brought them water. Hit the rock, talk to the rock, right? There were miracles that brought them food. Birds that came from the heavens, the most famous, of course, the manna that came every morning. But there were no miracles that gave them clothes. The pasuk says, "Sin latchalo valtame alecha." Their clothes just never wore out. Clouds of glory protected them. Moshe says, you know why there was no need for a miracle to give them clothing? Because they didn't want for clothing. They didn't feel they were missing anything. They were so, in this instance, they were so convinced of the fact that Hashem gave them everything they needed. They so trusted in God that whatever they had was enough, that there was no wanting. So if there was no wanting, Hashem didn't have to give them, and there was no need for a miracle. True reality, that whatever you have is what you need, worked. But if you think you're missing something, and you're not sure if Hashem is going to give to you, well then there's a lacking. The thirst was what created the need for the miracle, but it's not the ideal. If you could really know, when I was in the army, I found myself in lots of scary situations, Intifada, Lebanon, and I really struggled for a long time with how to overcome fear. Right? You're outside of a door, you know there's a terrorist inside, you have to lead your men, break down a door, go into a room, and you don't know if you're ever walking out of there. It can paralyze you. How do you overcome fear? Finally found the answer, thanks to Rav Medan, in a Rambam in Hilchos Melachim. The Rambam says that a soldier in a war is not allowed to be afraid. He has to put his family, other thoughts out of his mind. V'yish'an al mikveh Yisrael. He should lean on the wellspring of Israel, on God. Fear is the unknown. When you don't know, you become afraid. If you could really know, you'd never be afraid. If you could really know that Hashem runs the world, you'd never be afraid. The challenge of this pasuk reminds us on our journey that every piece of every journey is exactly what Hashem gives to us. L'chol motzaihem, the pasuk says, all the events that found them. This isn't a list of places they visit. What's a place in the desert? Another rock, another sand dune? This is a list of the events that occurred to him. Dizahav, the sin of the golden calf, right? Tofel v'lavan, the place where they complained about the manna which was white. These are the events. The event of Refidim was, know that whatever you have in your life, that's what you need to have. Hashem will always provide you. You just got to believe that that's there. Hidden in the message of Refidim in Parashat Masei. Something to think about in this week's portion of Masei. Shabbat Shalom, and thanks for listening.